Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And we're continuing on with our series on creating New Earth, a collaborative mission. And today we're going to have a roundtable discussion. So we couldn't just fine tune this to one guest. So we had to bring on all of them. And this is around a concept that Tay and I recently came across on private membership associations, private health associations. And we just wanted to start to dive into this more. And like we have said to everybody in the past, we are on our own exploration, and we invite all of you guys to join along with us. Find what resonates. The whole idea is that if you come across things that resonate, check it out. Do your own work, do your due diligence, do what you need to do to figure it out in more depth. We're taking you along this ride with us, and if it doesn't resonate, put it to the side. But that's what we do here. So today we wanted to learn more about this because it's been a big topic with all of the regulations that have been going on, particularly in Canada. Particularly around regulated health professions that are going to be enacted next year. Stuff that's come up around the Bill C-47 recently with all of the stuff around the natural health product industry. Lots of regulations and I think government overreach and whatnot, and likely going to create a lot of changes with the way natural health practitioners can function and practice. So this came up as another option on a way to explore how you can actually practice in the way that you feel is in the highest good for yourself and for your patients or your clients. And so we wanted to dive into it and talk to some people that have been teaching this and that have been actually implementing it and get their feedback. And so let's dive into it. We've got Laura Jane with us, we've got Alan, and we've got Ariane and Stefan. And we're going to just open this up, start it off, and then we'll kind of kick it out from there. And if you guys have any questions around this, please forward them back to us because we can even pull something together again to maybe pull everybody back at some point and answer some of these questions for you. That might be a really good idea as well. So Laura Jane, why don't we start off with you? Why don't you give a little introduction of yourself, and then we'll jump into what are these PMAs or these private health associations?
Or private member associations.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. And it's an honor to be here, Jason and Taya. I'm thrilled to bits. I'm Laura Jane. I actually am living in Cochrane, Alberta. And I came to be a PMA facilitator through Lifeforce Canada. I joined Lifeforce Canada a few years ago, and it's basically was co-founded by Karen Klassen and Sandra Quinn with the mission to truly help men and women to escape the matrix, but not escape as in running for fear, but into understanding and truly knowing who and what you are. So it's really about embracing your sovereignty, embracing your inner knowing, and then bringing that forward without fear of what we're living in. We know that we can't escape by fighting. So we are looking at creating parallel societies. So our mission with Lifeforce Canada is really about giving men and women the tools, the knowledge, and the connection with each other to do that. And so that was how I got involved. I'd gone down many rabbit holes looking for something because I knew that things were not right. And so this was where I landed. And I'm very glad I did because its mission resonates completely with me because it's really not just about men and women. We are moving into helping communities to set up themselves as sovereign communities outside governmental overreach, governmental interference, and to do that way. So that's where we're going. And part of that is private member associations, which is where I got very interested. I started, actually, I don't know when I started to really get involved. I do know that I wanted something because I had a nursing background and I knew as we went into COVID that it was a lot of baloney that they were feeding us. It was really not true, that they were not doing anything that was going to help anyone. If anything, it was going to curtail and siphon us all into their disease care system. and to make sure that we eventually were not able to express ourselves, get what we wanted, to be connected to nature or even connected to ourselves. And so and in particular, I was looking at the business models because I have a business background as well. And I thought, well, there has to be something. And I heard about private member associations. I always thought they were things like private golf courses and clubs and all that. But what I discovered as I went down the rabbit hole, which began probably around 2018, was that this is a very real phenomena, that a private member association is something that can be utilized with integrity and with freedom. And as long as you know what you're doing and how you're doing it, and you are coming from a place of knowing within and your own sovereignty. And this is what it is. So a private member association is essentially, you know what it is? It's really a business model to help you bring forward your life's passion. It's about visualizing, bringing that forward, being of service to mankind. And I first learned about it. I enrolled with David Edwards' course, which was great. He's sort of considered the father of it, although it's ancient. Private member associations have been around since the 1500s. We just was hidden like everything else from us, So I studied with David Edwards, and he's the founder of PMA Power, but he's based in the States, and he was a former lawyer. So when I first started learning PMAs, there had statutes, and we were talking about the Universal, Human Rights Declaration, talking about the ICCR, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and all of that. And I thought, okay, well, that's very interesting. I'm not sure how that fits with what I was learning about natural law, even though it said it was natural law. And then what I found was that it was very American. It focused a lot on Constitution. It focused a lot on what they use in the States. And I thought, well, that's not resonating well with me. It's not something that we would use here. So then I got in and I found a Canadian PMA advisor who had studied under David Edwards. So I joined Jackie's PMA and I started to learn more. Now, she was very biblical based, as well as still stating statutes and all of the covenants. And so I was with Jackie for quite a while. I still am, actually. And a great PMA. Really focused on, she has an incredible history, but she's focused very much on the farming, agriculture, and bringing together that area. And so then a little bit later, I started just doing my own information, and I said, you know what? As I learned about natural law and as I saw how it would apply, I said, this is the answer, because this is where we truly are standing in our own authority. We are not within any other governmental overreach. We are truly living in the private. So as a result, Karen came to me because I talked about what I had learned. And she says, okay, so when are you teaching the course? And so I thought, I guess I'm going to put my knowledge to use. So I created the course, and the course has a component where we actually look at your whole PMA. You envision it. You envision it, and you also have to talk about what it is you truly are giving back. What service are you doing for mankind? It is truly your soul's calling when you go into a PMA. And so when I created the course, I first went through that. So that's part of the course. That's pretty much the first day. And then the second part is really looking at the paperwork. And the paperwork is necessary so that for two reasons. Number one, it reinforces within you your own power. It reinforces within you what you're doing by inviting these men and women to come into your PMA and to use your service. And the second, and so that's the second one. It helps you stand in that. Plus, if you ever are challenged by a government agent or authority, you have your paperwork in place, which you comprehend completely, and you then are able to basically stand in your own authority and not stand in fear of authority at your doorstep. And that is first and foremost the thing you have to learn, is that they have no authority over us, and we have given it away. Well, this course, we're taking it all back, which means when we have our business model, it is our business. It is our private business. It is none of their business. So when you go into a PMA, you aren't looking at statutes, you aren't looking at regulation, but you also are not carrying a title. So if you are a doctor and you open a PMA, you're not opening it as a doctor. That is a title. You are opening it as a man or woman who has knowledge, expertise, and information to share in service to others to bring in their health and to help them to get healthier and to maintain health. And that's why we're doing it. So PMAs are quite powerful. And the one thing that we have discovered is that there has been very few PMA challenges in Canada. Predominantly with our PMAs, the ones that we're using through Life Force Canada, we're actually, because we're based on natural law, we aren't quoting statutes and we aren't going into court. The first thing we teach is stay out of court. Don't go into court. The police come knocking on the door. Don't answer. You don't have to. That's a fallacy. You don't have to do that. So that's the first thing. But the other thing is they have not been able to really bring a PMA into court. They've challenged, and they also will say, oh, well, we have taken PMAs to court, but they have not, because when you look at it, they're not an unregistered, unincorporated organization. They actually, if you dig, what they've brought forward are those that are actually have a foot in the door.
Yeah, that's great, Laura Jane. Those were definitely some of the questions I had around that, is that if people are, I was going to say, so if people are a regulated health practitioner that are a part of a governing college or a regulatory body, for them to be in a PMA, they basically, do they need to resign, or can they actually still carry those designations, but their PMA can be something completely separate? Can they do both, or is that getting where you've got one foot in the door? Or what would need to happen to be able to still hold your title if you wanted to, and then also operate that, or does that run into troubles at some point?
Excellent question, Jason. It is doable. It is absolutely doable. What you need to really be clear on is when you're operating as a public persona, a public, and when you are operating in the private. That is the key. And you do not want to cross over or cross-contaminate, or you then put yourself and all your members of your PMA at risk of authority. So yes, you can have that. If you are, and in fact, there's been examples of doctors that have set up PMAs. And what they've done is they have like a practice with two doors, one marked private and one is a clinic. All right. And so what happens there is that the doctor can retain all his, dues and pay into it and be regulated, but he may want to still be able to do, if someone needs a prescription, to write a prescription, or if they need to have a test done that you can't get otherwise. Although I have to say, more and more, we're moving away from that because we're moving much more into natural. But they can do that. That is totally separate. When he walks into his PMA, his private member association, or his private health association, which is what you were talking about here, he actually takes off that jacket, There is no persona. And now he is entering as an equal. And there is no need for certification or any of those overreach. He is now in a place where he pays no dues. He does not comply with any of the directives or mandates that he would otherwise be necessary to do when he's registered or licensed, because that's a public. Absolutely. So what he's doing in the private is he's just simply sharing his knowledge, his expertise, and all of that with his members. And there's no patient-doctor relationship or anything. And in a membership, every member needs to come in through a proper vetting and a proper waiving of liabilities and all of that. That's part of the paperwork that you have to do, to make sure that it comes on board. So you can do that. The only thing is that it can get blurry, and you have to be very separate, because if, like these crazy regulations, and they come down on a doctor, if he hasn't kept it or she hasn't kept it totally separate and bled over, they will then have an avenue into a formerly private member association. And that's what we call commingling. And you don't want to do that. Not a good plan.
The Inspire Health podcast will be right back.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It reminds me, one of my mentors that I trained with for a long time, Dr. Jerry Tennant, wrote a book called Healing is Voltage. He'll be on this series at some point. He's from Texas, and he's in his 80s now, and as far as I know, he's been running as a PMA. Now, I'm not sure if it's called a PMA. It's a private something association that he does. But he would often, if he was getting up to speak, the very first thing, because he actually carries dual license, or he carries his MD license still. But any talk that he does, anything he does, he's always saying, I'm going to mention right now, I'm not speaking as a medical doctor. I'm speaking from my pastoral license, which is related to his private association, and always keeps it very separate. So, but I definitely get where the lines could get mingled a bit. One question I have is for people that are, so say a practitioner decides to stop being regulated. If they want to resign, they don't want to practice that anymore. How does that work in a PMA for, say, quote unquote, restricted acts that usually require you to have a specific designation to perform? So say something like, maybe someone was a doctor and now they're going to work in a PMA. They don't want to practice as a regulated professional anymore that way. They want to do it more as a PMA. Are they allowed to look into somebody's ears still, even though that's a restricted act? Or what if they know how to do acupuncture, but now they're not technically regulated anymore to perform that? Do they lose the ability to do certain tasks or certain types of treatment with the people that they would want to see?
Good question. In fact, they lose nothing. All they lose is government mandate and overreach. When they are in their private practice, their private member association, they are dealing one-on-one, man to man, woman to woman, man to woman, whatever. Remember, they are not dealing with patients. They are dealing with those, and the experience and the knowledge that they have, they're going to utilize. And that's why your members are joining you. That's part of your benefits. So if you know and you've learned how to look into an ear to see what the problem is, and you have an otoscope, then go for it. Why would you not do that? Remember, everything that's done in a private member association is private. It is confidential. It is only for members. And so those members sign confidentiality agreements. They sign non-disclosures. They also truly comprehend that they are going in there as a man or a woman. There is no title and there is no liability. It's it is about us taking self-responsibility for ourselves. And it's about acting on that. So we're self-governing. We're grown-ups now. This is what a PMA is, going from being that adult, that child where we always had to seek permission, and doctors were, I remember when I was nursing, we used to spell doctor G-O-D, and so that is kind of what we're taking away. We're saying, no, this is a man or a woman who have some fantastic skills and have a true calling to be of service in this area. Why would we restrict them? Why would we demand? But we also will only go to them if we truly believe that they will do it. And that is my choice. I voluntarily go into a PMA. It's not like a healthcare system where you kind of get shuffled off. You don't have choice. Here it's voluntary and it is a choice. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that totally does. So the only reason why, say, a doctor would lose prescription rights, because they would have to then be telling the person to go back into the system outside of the engagement with just man to man, woman to woman, woman to man, whatever, but as an individual person. So they would lose their prescription rights because then they would have to go back in. Or if they had to send them back to a government lab or something like that to get testing. But if they were to operate through private labs, which you can access, most people now, personally, I use different private labs for different testing for things if I need to. That would be okay though. So you could use that because that's done privately. It's not back in the system. So as long as you're not crossing back over into the system, then you can do whatever it is that you are trained to do.
Yeah. And you can also refer, your man or woman that you're in your PMA, you can refer them to the public. You just have to be very clear that I'm referring you into the public, that this is no longer, within our PMA. And that's one. The other thing I'm finding is that most of the doctors in particular that are moving into PMA are going back to natural. They're really looking at the natural medicines. They're looking at food as medicine. They're looking at energy medicines. And if you did acupuncture in your doctor's practice, you can still do acupuncture in your center that you set up as a PMA. There's nothing stopping you from that. Provided you're offering a service that you're trained in, that you at least have the knowledge of, you're not putting your members at risk, so that's important. But the thing about a PMA is that those that initiate PMAs are doing so with huge amounts of integrity. And that is so important, and that's the one thing that I can say about I think I've had about 80 now, 70 or 80 through my courses. I can say that every one of them have strong, strong integrity, and they are self-governing. And they honor that in all the members that they bring into their PME. And I can't think of a better group that I would want to go to, particularly if I'm looking for information for my health. It's very important.
Well, this is part of what I really like about this too, is it's like, to do that, you really are setting it up for that reason. And the people that I know that have done it too, that's the general feeling around that. Mm-hmm. And can you connect PMAs? If I have a PMA, can I connect that to another person's PMA? And then the members that come in through my PMA also get the benefits of being connected to another one, and then another one. Because I'm almost seeing this as being a way of creating lots of value for people to come in and be sort of exposed to a lot of really high quality care.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is important to connect the PMAs. And so I've done some structure models that I like, and there's an alliance PMA. And in an alliance PMA, it's like a big directory where you would go. But then there's another one called a hub. And when you do a hub, that's where you actually have all your PMAs interlinked, and you have the founders of those PMAs coming together to work within a geographic area or a particular area of expertise. And so that is how you would go. And yes, absolutely. I mean, if I'm referring anyone, I'm referring them to a PMA I know and I trust. All right. And so that's how it'll go. And once you've experienced a PMA and you have had access to the absolute care of a PMA and the honesty of a PMA, you don't ever want to go outside. You really do look for others. So if you had, and it happens anyway, because I also have had folks that have set up farmers markets and have farms as PMAs. And so if I have someone coming in and they say to me, well, you know what, you're talking about, I need to change a diet or I need to do something like that. You say, where would I go to get this? Oh, well, I happen to know this other PMA, and you can make that direct referral. And you can actually talk to the other founder and say, you know what, I really like your product. They're organic, they're healthy, and they're in the private. So we know there's no regulation. So we would love to be able to refer back and forth. So yeah, that's how it goes. And when we talk about what Karen and I are teaching now, which is a sovereign community leadership program, that is for whole communities. And within that community, all of the business models are going to be PMAs. They're going to start out that way. And I'm actually working with a group in Northern Ontario right now who is actually setting up, well, I'm working with her to set up the paperwork and the Sovereign Council Association for the first PMA or private community. And she's got all of her other groups there, the honey, there's honey, what else is it? There's homes, building of homes, they're all going to be PMAs within that community, all linked into that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that was a question that I had. So we've been talking about health practitioners, but this is relevant for any type of business or service that you want to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, I've got one of the alumni from our founders PMA course. She's got an Airbnb. She's got, and she also does hair salon, so it doesn't matter what business you're in. If that's your calling, if that's how you're going to be of service, you're open to that. Now, if you are in a business that relies on a lot of bringing people in and all of that, then you might want to think about a PMA. Might not be the best option. But as we move more and more to communities, I think that we're going to find that we're going to probably move that way, because there are no taxes. You do not remit taxes. You are not under a taxation. You don't submit anything to any government ever. And that's the thing. And Alan, you can speak to that more than, so that's one of the things. And also the linking. I think Ariane and Stefan have done a lot of talking and connecting as well with other PMAs.
That's wonderful. I think that sounds really exciting. Alan, why don't we pop over to you? Laura Jane just mentioned that around that. I think that's an important one for a lot of people to understand too, is around the taxes part of it. And Alan, maybe you could just introduce yourself and how you sort of got into PMA and then your experience with it and tied with taxes and stuff. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, my name is Alan Bruff, and I've been the executive director of Canada Health Alliance for a couple of years now, going back to, I think, 2021, end of 2021, I joined them. And prior to that, I was involved with I was one of the founders of Freedom Rising. So I've been looking at alternatives to what we've been seeing happening around us for pretty much the last 3 or 4 years. And at Canada Health Alliance, we very focused on building and establishing a parallel healthcare system, because we are obviously highly disillusioned with what we've seen happening over the last couple of years. And we've got about over 5,000 members across the whole of Canada, half of whom are healthcare practitioners, doctors, nurses, chiropractors, naturopaths, homeopaths, a whole gamut are members of Canada Health Alliance. But all of them are united around trying to give the public alternatives or at least choice. If we don't have choice, we really don't have freedom, because we just, it's basically you can have any color you like as long as it's black. That's not really a choice, And with healthcare, it's so critical that people do have choice. At the moment, average waiting time in an emergency room across the country is more than 12 hours. You can bleed to death in that time. The more choice we have, the more people get tapped off that or out of that waiting room. And therefore, it helps everyone. Those who can afford an alternative, great. Those who can't have a lesser waiting time. And so in the quest to find those options, we've been looking at all sorts of, alternative treatments. How do we make healthcare much more integrative? How do we get a better working relationship between medical doctors, homeopaths, naturopaths? So we're all working in the best interests of the patient, instead of trying to build sort of empires by modality, which isn't really a very good thing. And as part of that journey, we then started facing significant resistance, like with Bill 36 in British Columbia, which is really draconian. And I fear that it's probably being rolled out in British Columbia almost as a test case for the rest of Canada. If it works there, I think it's going to be applied to all of us. So with all of these things, we really need to find a viable option. And as part of that exploration, that's really where I got to know Lifeforce and Laura Jane particularly. And what I realized is that there is actually a way that we can do this and operate outside of a system which is not telling you or educating you about these options. There's very little knowledge. And so when it comes to things like not paying taxes, immediately everybody's blood runs cold because that sounds like tax evasion. It sounds criminal. And these sort of things are built up in our minds, I think, as ways to build fear to keep us compliant. And I'm not advocating that anybody doesn't obey the law or do the right thing. And it really comes down to doing the right thing. But there are ways and there are provisions for us to do these things. And they're perfectly legal, and they're used a lot more than we realize. I know in the course that I did with Laura Jane, we were talking about how the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party in Canada are PMAs. And if they can do it, well, surely we can too. The Hells Angels are also a PMA, which is why they can never be taken out. And these sort of things are fascinating when you start to look into it. It's those people who understand the system that can operate probably for more nefarious reasons than for benefit of mankind. But if we can use those systems to benefit society, to benefit our community, to benefit our neighbors, now I think that we're starting to look at not just building a parallel healthcare system, which is my particular focus, but building a better, more healthy, more vibrant community, because we will be building the foundation of the next age. And we are the privileged ones to do that. And this, I think, is a key way for us to do that. So going back to your question about taxation and that sort of thing, as I say, it's not something that I talk about too often to people that don't really understand PMAs, because I think that it immediately builds a negative perception. And I think that just tells us how this whole issue has been politicized to try and make people less enthusiastic to look into it, because immediately you feel like a criminal if you're going to do something like that. And there is an advantage in not paying tax, obviously, because you've got more cash flow for your business, but you've got to abide by the rules. So if you're not paying tax, you can't really claim benefits of taxation. You can't be part of a system which you've chosen not to be part of. You can't say, well, I'm expecting all of these services that you would as a normal tax-paying sort of business. And you've got to understand the differences. You've got to actually be prepared to be more independent and not to encroach on a system which you've turned your own back on. So while you don't have to pay tax, you must also abide by the rules. And that's my first advice with people around that. But I think this is almost the loophole that we can start to establish commercial activity which builds cash flow, if I could use a term, on our side of the fence. Because we actually ultimately have two societies and two economies. And the old economy is very big, and it drains money from our side of the fence. We need to turn that around. We need to have business and economic activity on our side of the fence that draws cash and money and reserves from the old established system. And the reason why we need to do that is that I always like to learn the lessons of history. If we think about what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed, there was 10 years of perestroika, as they called it, but it was actually just 10 years of turmoil because the old system collapsed too quickly and nobody had new systems or a new economy in place to be able to sustain themselves. And by opening PMAs and being able to do business that is right and fit for our community and for our vision of the future, it's enabling us to survive that period of perestroika. People died of starvation in those 10 years between, the late 1980s, 1990s in the ex-Soviet Union. And we need to just be prepared and ready to be able to legally do commercial activity without going into that sort of turmoil. At the end of the day, if you survive that turmoil, we will build a better world and we will have a better environment. But I think that you've got to keep your eye on the benefits and abide by the rules. Because in the death throes of an old system, it becomes more draconian. And that's the phase that we're going into now, I think.
Yeah, that was brilliant, Ellen.
Beautiful.
That is amazing that the Liberal Party is a PMA and that the Hells Angels are a PMA. No kidding. That makes so much sense. Honestly, this is what I think is so funny. It's like when you hear these things, it's kind of like, oh, what is that? That sounds kind of, it's like these things have been done for a while and by people that really know what they're doing with them, obviously. But this is what I think is so fascinating about this time is it feels like it's like this information is kind of becoming more widely available. And I think people are in a place where they are getting more and more comfortable to step into the ownership of that. Because it goes right hand in hand with that self-responsibility. And this is what we talk about being sovereign. It's like, okay, that means on a lot of different aspects of that. So if you're ready to do that, then this might appeal to you. If that doesn't feel and you want somebody else to deal with it for you, then they'll be happy to kind of take care of it for you. But to me, what I feel like is going on particularly with health right now is it's literally going to become impossible to practice in the way that most practitioners, I think, really do feel is in the highest good for their patients in the current model. It's just going to get too limiting and too restrictive. So when you're talking about creating a parallel way of doing things, that makes a lot of sense to me personally and I know hundreds of other practitioners that are feeling that same way, but they're just scared because they don't know what the other options can look like.
I agree with you 100%. And I think that if you're operating in British Columbia with Bill 36, I don't think Bill 36 will last because it is really just too draconian. I think there's enough pushback that it will actually be repealed in the end. But we've just got to make sure that we don't have livelihoods destroyed. And I think the lesson that we've all learned through 2020, 2021, 2022, where non-essential businesses, the first thing that happened in 2020, non-essential businesses were closed. Well, every business is essential to the person who's making a livelihood from it. So I don't want to go back into that position. I don't want to risk my livelihood on the whim of some politician who doesn't really understand my business or what I'm doing. It was just a blanket ruling, which in hindsight we know was just hugely damaging to the national economy. And to make sure that doesn't happen again, I think the PMAs are the option to go. But never mind what happened then. I mean, I think healthcare practitioners in British Columbia with Bill 36 are under massive threat. And it's the only way that I think that you can continue to operate. And again, I often wonder, what was the commercial activity like in really hard times, like the medieval times and that sort of thing, where you had despotic fiefdoms and local, barons who just sort of raped and pillaged the local population. You had to work outside the system. You had to find ways of keeping yourself alive. And when humans are put under immense pressure, we're quite innovative in terms of finding options. And I think the pressure that we've been under for the last 3 years is almost bringing out remarkable creativity to protect and to grow our livelihoods, not just to survive, but to actually prosper. So I'm seeing this as being almost the catalyst of creativity, of independence, of true sovereignty. and of a desire across our community to make the world a better place. So I think that it's actually done us a favor. I think this has been a wake-up call for a lot of people, and I think it's a privilege to be alive at the moment. I think, we're witnessing a remarkable time, and we have the opportunity to be part of it and to actually contribute to it. We're no longer just citizens of a, country that's got 40 million people. We're actually players in this game. We can influence the outcome, and I think it's a remarkable time.
The Inspire Health podcast will be right back.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Alan. I think that it's fascinating right now. And I remember even back in 2022 when I chose to resign from the College of Naturopathic Doctors in Ontario. And I remember saying to Taya, at a certain point, it's just because it was just, every time I think about it, it just felt way too uncomfortable, stressful, and I didn't want to support it anymore. That was a part of it, is I just didn't want to support, I didn't want to pay dues to them. I wasn't comfortable with what they were sort of mandating on the profession. And I remember saying to Tay, I feel like at some point it's all going to change, and we'll have something that'll be like this sort of communion of like allied health professionals that will all be able to kind of interact, that won't necessarily have to have their titles and all the different things, and just be able to really make it patient-centered. We did a conversation just the other day with Dr. Jacqueline Hobbs, Oracle girl, who's brilliant, and really was a really amazing conversation. But part of what we talked about was that it's really switching gears, and the idea is that the focus becomes on the bonds of affection. That's number one. So it starts there. And so when Laura Jane, when you're talking about just the integrity that goes into even wanting to build something like this and create that, and the members, so it's like there's a relationship involved in all of that, and that's sort of number one before then even sort of figuring out how that's going to work. But that's kind of where the heart's at to begin it all. I mean, it's a very different way of doing business.
For me, just to finish what you were saying there, that's why I love being in the healthcare field, because we are facing a tsunami of pain, disease, illness, chronic conditions across the board springing up everywhere. And if we can find a way of operating through PMAs in a way that we can continue to provide a service, we need to help these people. We need to help our neighbors, friends, and the community around us, because there's such a real problem. And so many people went into nursing or became doctors because they were passionate about helping people. They wanted to help. This is the thing that really drove them when they went to university to study nursing, etc. And they've become so jaded and so disillusioned because it's just a political game. They're told what to say. They don't have an opinion. If they know what's good for the patient, they're not even allowed to talk about it. These sort of things, or a PMA, I think, allow people to walk away from those sort of things and to be able to deliver a service that is really for the good of the community. So the PMA that I've set up is actually, we have opened a scalar energy lounge, which is really looking at immersing people in scalar energy. I hesitate to use the term healing, but scalar energy to basically recharge people's bodies and boost their body's ability to self-heal. And these sort of things haven't been embraced by the allopathic system. The old colleges and the old provincial health services and that sort of thing don't want competition. They've been benefiting from a monopoly for a long time. And I think that this is the cusp of a whole new dawn of healthcare, actually, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think people are wanting more because they're also experiencing the limitations of the current system, and they want something different. So you put more restrictions on that when the desire is to have something very different, something's gonna combust at some point. Ariane and Stefan, welcome over here too. Thanks for sitting in the background there. Now, you guys are practitioners, and I would love to get a little intro on you guys and just your experience actually working with clients and in this whole experience, and even when you transferred over from what you used to do and how you kind of set it up as a PMA. So let me pass it over to you guys.
Thank you. Ladies first.
So it's really interesting that we're talking about the Western medical system and how it's on its deathbed, essentially. You know, I'm hearing you speak, Ellen, and I'm hearing you speak, LJ. And I have about 20 years teaching in the field of holistic health. And I have a lot of expertise in the energetics. So working with deep somatic work, helping people with unresolved trauma, multi-generational trauma, with chronic issues in their body, and assisting individuals and going to the root of the illness rather than the symptoms and putting band-aids on the symptoms and expecting it to heal. And I think, I don't think I know that we're seeing a lot of people who aren't getting results from that, you know, and it's just this cycle that they are stuck in. And it gets worse and worse, and they have to pay out more money and more pills, and where's the solution? So when I hear you speak, Alan and LJ, I find it really reinforces what we're doing, because we really we're at the forefront of a few different movements, Stefan and I, for PMA. One of them is assisting people in going to the origins of their health, the origins of their illness, you know, I do this through deep somatic energetic work. And Stefan does this through as a myofascial practitioner and movement therapist. And so, we've seen exceptional results, and we're seeing more and more people come to us because they're done. They're like, listen, we're done. We're just done with what's going on out there. And we want to genuinely go to the root of what's going on. And so, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to jump into that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So talking about the dovetail transition process, we were part of the inaugural course that LJ put together, which was back in November. And coming up to the end of October, or actually coming up to the end of November, I had my business license was coming up and was due for new renewal. And it's also around that time there was a bill coming through, which eventually passed, that made it so that client records need to be overturned to government authority on demand. And that didn't sit well with me. I want to know that when I'm working with someone, that they can have solace in knowing that whatever we're working through is going to be kept private and confidential. And I don't want to have to overturn it on demand to some other authority. And so these two factors really served as a catalyst for us to start to look at establishing our PMAs, and also was a catalyst in us setting it up so quickly. So February 1st is when we kicked it off. And we haven't really looked back. There have been a lot of interesting nuances that we have to navigate, new neural pathways that we have to establish, because the vocabulary has to change. And so there's a big education process with the people that come on board, you know, letting them know that, okay, this is not a practitioner-client relationship or patient relationship. You are now coming in as a man or woman, and we're seeing each other as members. Okay, you're not going to get a receipt from me. You may get some type of statement that acknowledges that there's been a confirmation of exchange. So that's what we're going to call it, or proof of exchange. And that's going to be in the form of a donation or a contribution. And so, so far, we've noticed that it's been really, really well received. And in fact, more and more people are inquiring about, how can this apply to me? You know, whether they're general contractors in construction. So I think we've had quite a few people now from our community, we're based in the Comox Valley, enter into the Life Force Canada's courses, because I think you've done 4 now, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So it's really nice to see that there's a growing interest and momentum with this. And so certainly some of our next steps will involve being a hub for PMAs. Yeah. And some of the affiliations Ariane was alluding to actually extend into the United States, where a common term they use is private unincorporated association. So we've got the line open there with one set up as a food co-op. where, they're selling raw milk and other products there.
This comes to the end of our time for this episode. Please go to inspirehealthpodcast.com and listen to the remainder of this important episode. Thank you so much.